Well, I'll begin with a few comments. I'm obviously not a diplomat. A decade ago, Cyprus was non-aligned and widely viewed as a problem in Washington. Anyone who would say that 10 years later, we would be where we are now with the US-Cypriot strategic dialogue, the recent very successful visit to the Oval Office by the president, I mean, people would have thought that you were crazy if you would have predicted this in the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, when it comes to Donald Trump, who is the elephant in the room, I'm not a Europeanist by training. I recognize he's very unpopular in Europe. That said, I spend most of my time in the Middle East and Africa, where he was considerably more popular than his opponent. That said, when it comes down to it, personnel is policy. We've already had one Trump administration, and we had Mike Pompeo and Wes Mitchell, who are personally very much responsible for the evolution and the depth of the US-Cypriot relationship today. And personnel matters. And I would also add Marius Lysiotis was the right ambassador at the right time in Washington. All this led to the strategic partnership. Now, as we look forward, while there's a lot of talk about Donald Trump, I would urge analysts to look at the staffing choices for Vice President Vance, because that, more than simply over the next year, is going to show the trajectory of where the United States might go. That said, what I would note is that Cyprus in Washington is one of the rare countries, India, Japan, and Australia being the others, that is seen as, that has a bipartisan consensus with regard to the importance of the US relationship, the strength of the US partnership. And it's not just bipartisan. Many analysts say that while we have two main parties in the United States, there's really 5 ideological factions in Congress. And I would say that the consensus extends to all 5 of those ideological factions, whether you're a progressive, whether you're a libertarian, whether you're a MAGA Republican, whether you're a mainstream liberal internationalist, it doesn't matter. Cyprus is important. Now, there's reasons for this. Cyprus is seen as fair and realistic on Israel. Too often, the United Nations, and frankly, many in Western Europe, are seen as virtue signaling without actually being productive to the solutions or moving the process ahead. Cyprus is an exception to that. I would say that when it comes to small state diplomacy, we have Cyprus, Togo, Oman, and Armenia, which today are really punching above the weight in ways that many big countries can only dream of. I would also add in my remaining minute or so, there's real congressional interest in Cyprus. This is important. You know, a lot of people criticize the US-Cuban relationship, the 60 years of American sanctions on Cuba and so forth, and they wonder why a president like Barack Obama or Joe Biden couldn't reverse the sanctions. And the reason is simple, because the Helms-Burton Act in Congress instituted the policy, and it will take an act of Congress to reverse that. Now we have something similar, but on the positive sense, with regard to Cyprus when it comes to the Eastern Mediterranean Security and Energy Partnership Act. The US-Cypriot partnership is going to transcend any single man or woman in the White House. It's going to transcend any particular activist in Congress. The fact of the matter is, this relationship is now institutionalized in a very positive way. One thing which we often don't pay attention to as well is that we've seen a sea change in Greek-American effectiveness. If you want to criticize Donald Trump, and I don't know how the Greek community actually voted, or if it was consistent, but I would note that of all the ethnic affinity groups, the Greeks were in the most swing districts, more than any other ethnic group, more than the Armenians, more than Muslims, which we heard so much about in Michigan and Minnesota, the Greeks were in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and so forth, in all those congressional districts. But Greek Americans, now we have a generation that have been schooled in America, that have been readily engaged in American politics, that actually engage with other ethnic affinity groups. And let me just say, in conclusion, that we have a situation where Cyprus and the American policy towards Cyprus is also shaped by the neighborhood. And that includes Turkey, that includes Lebanon, Syria, more broadly Russia. And so this is all going to play out in the future. But let me turn back.